At some point, the backlog stopped being a backlog. You probably didn't notice when it happened. There wasn't a number it crossed or a morning you woke up and felt it differently. It was gradual, one sale, one bundle, one recommendation at a time, until the library that used to feel like a collection of things you were looking forward to started feeling like something else entirely. Not exciting, but heavy. And here's the thing about heaviness. Most people carry it for years without even asking the question directly. They manage around it. They build systems for it. They recognize their priority list and set rules about purchasing and try to stay on top of it. But they never stop and ask the question that would actually change something. Not how do I get through my backlog, not how do I stop buying games, but when did it become a problem? What does the backlog that actually works look like? And how do I know I've crossed the line from a library that serves me into one that I'm serving? Because there's a line, and it isn't the same number for everyone. It isn't measured in games or hours or completion percentages, but it exists. And the players who find their way back to a healthy relationship with their library are almost always the ones who learn to see it clearly. This video is about that line, where it is, how to cross it, and what to do the moment you realize you're on the wrong side of it. So, let's go! Welcome to Telplay. I'm Vashral. This channel is for people who love gaming and want a healthier, more honest relationship with their library. The backlog, the habits, the psychology that suits underneath all of it. That's what we are working through here. And this video is one I've been building towards for a while. Not because the question is new. Backlog size has been a conversation in gaming communities for as long as digital storefronts made it possible to own more games than one life could contain. People joke about it. They post their own numbers like a badge. They commiserate in forums about the pile of shame and the endless queue and the Steam sales that added 40 games to the library that wasn't already 2,000 deep. The joke is comfortable. It keeps the question at a distance. But underneath the joke, underneath the self-deprecation library screenshot and the memes about how never finishing anything, there's a real question that most people actually are avoiding. Because the answer might require something more uncomfortable than recognizing a priority list. The question is whether the backlog is still serving you. Not whether it is too large by some external standards, not whether you are keeping pace with the games you're buying, but whether you'll ever reach the end of it. You won't. And that's fine. But whether the relationship you currently have with your library is one that supports your enjoyment of gaming or one that has quietly, incrementally started to undermine it. That distinction between a backlog that serves you and a backlog you're serving is the entire subject of this video. We're going to cover what is a healthy backlog actually look like, what the specific signals that tell you that it become a problem, where the line is between a large library and a damaging one, and what practical steps actually move the needle once you've decided to address it honestly. No productivity framework, no 30 days challenge, no rules that tell you how many games you are allowed to own, just an honest conversation about most backlog content is too comfortable to ask directly. When does the backlog become a big problem? So, let's find out. Before we talk about when the backlog becomes a problem, we need to establish something that almost nobody in this conversation ever defines clearly. What a backlog that isn't a problem looks like. Because without a picture, without specific, honest description of what a functional relationship with a large library actually feels like, the problem has no contrast. You can't identify when you've crossed the line you've never seen it drawn. So let's draw it. A healthy backlog is not a small one. That's the first thing worth saying directly. Because the instinct when backlog conversation gets serious is to treat size as a primary variable. The backlog is too big. The solution is to make it smaller. Get the number down, everything else follows. But the size is a symptom, not the condition. And treating a symptom without understanding the condition is how players spend years cycling through purges and reorganizing and purchasing freezes that provide temporary relief without addressing what's actually wrong. The number of games in your library is not what determines whether your backlog is healthy or not. What determines it is your relationship with that number. Specifically, what feels like to open the library. What happens in your body and your mind in the moment the list appears on the screen. Here's what that moment feels like when a backlog is working. The library feels like a set of genuine choices available to you. Different games for different moods, different energy levels, different amounts of available time. The variety is an asset. You're not overwhelmed by it. You're resourced by it. The scroll doesn't produce anxiety. It produces something closer to the feeling of standing in front of a well-stacked kitchen and deciding what you're in the mood to cook. Ownership without obligation. The games you haven't played yet don't press on you. They're available, they're waiting, but they're not generating a background signal of incompleteness and follows you out of your room whenever you close the library. You own them, they don't own you. Genuine anticipation for specific titles. Somewhere in the library there are games you're actually looking forward to. Not in a vague, somewhat sense, in a specific, I know what that game is and I'm genuinely excited to get there sense. The high priority list is short enough to be real rather than aspirational. 3 to 5 games that you should start tonight if circumstances allow. Forward motion without urgency. Sessions produce a feeling of engagement rather than management. You finish a game or you choose to move on from one and you feel something. Completion, satisfaction, honest assessment, rather than a low-grade relief of having reduced a number. The library is moving, but the movement feels chosen rather than owned. Those 4 qualities, option without overwhelm, ownership without obligation, genuine anticipation, forward motion without urgency, that's the functional state. That's what a backlog that is serving you actually feels like from the inside. You're probably thinking, that sounds right, and I don't feel any of these things. Which is why I'm watching this video. And that's exactly the correct observation, because the gap between that description and your current experience is precisely the territory the video is going to map. But here's what's important about establishing the functional state first. It reframes the goal. The goal isn't to finish the backlog. It isn't to reach your inbox 0 on your library or to achieve a specific number or to satisfy some extra standards of what a well-managed game collection looks like. The goal is to get back to the 4 qualities, to restore the relationship between you and your library to one where opening it feels like option rather than obligation, where the games that you haven't played yet feel like possibilities than pressure. That goal is achievable regardless of the library size. A 3,000 game library can have it. 3,000 game library can lack it entirely. The number is not the point. The functional state, the specific quality of relationship between a player and their library in which the backlog serves the player rather than the player serving the backlog. Characterized by option without overwhelm, ownership without obligation, genuine anticipation, and forward motion without urgency. Knowing what you're aiming for is the prerequisite for everything that follows, because the question this video is actually answering isn't just when does the backlog become a problem, it's how far are you from the functional state and what got you there. That distance is what we're measuring next. The backlog doesn't become a problem in a single moment. That's what makes it too easy to miss. There's no threshold crossing, no alarm, no morning. You wake up and think, today is the day my library stops serving me. It happens the way most slow deterioration happen, incrementally, through accumulate small shifts that individually are easy to rationalize and collectively impossible to ignore once you finally look at them directly. But the signals are there. They've been there for a while, and once you know what to look for, they're not subtle. Here are the specific ones, not vague checklists. The actual experiences, the ones that, if you recognize them honestly, tell you that the relationship has crossed from healthy into something that needs attention. First signal is that opening the library produces dread before it produces anything else. The second signal is that you're buying games faster than you're playing them, and the gap is accelerating. The third signal is that you've stopped finishing things, not because you're busier, but because finishing has stopped feeling like anything. The fourth signal is that you're talking about your backlog more than you're playing it. And the fifth signal is the one that underlines all the others, such as gaming has started to feel like you're something behind on. These signals are not personality flaws. They're not evidence of poor discipline or weak character. They are predictable results of a relationship that drifts in a direction nobody chose deliberately. and the relationship that drifted can be redirected. So you recognize the signals, maybe one of them, maybe several. Maybe you read through that last section with a specific quality of recognition that felt less like learning something new and more like having something you already knew named out loud. Which means the next question is one that actually requires courage to answer honestly. How did it get here? Because the signals describe the current state. They don't explain the mechanism. And without understanding the mechanism, the specific way, the healthy relationship become an unhealthy one. The practical steps that follows this section will treat symptoms rather than causes. You'll recognize and purge the set new rule. And in 6 months, the signal will be back because the thing that generates them was never addressed. The mechanism is almost always one of the three things. Sometimes it's all three, operating simultaneously, reinforcing each other in a way that makes the whole larger than individual part. The first mechanism is the gradual reweighting of ownership over experience. Gaming at its core, it's an experimental hobby. Point is the playing. The accumulation is supposed to be a service of that, and you own games so that you have the option of what to play, not so that you have a collection to maintain. But somewhere in the growth of its library, the weights shifted. Ownership starts carrying its own satisfaction that was separated from the experience of playing. The library becomes a thing of itself, something to curate, to grow, to display, to discuss. The identity of someone who has a large library starts competing with the identity of someone who plays games. And as the library grew, the curation requires to maintain it started consuming more attention than the playing did. This reweighting is gradual enough to be invisible while it's happening. You don't decide to value ownership over experience. The library just accumulates enough mass that maintaining it requires attention. The attention, once given to the library as an object, starts generating its own momentum. The library becomes a project, and the projects have demands that experiences don't. Once the library is a project, the backlog is no longer a byproduct of enthusiasm. And incompletion in a project with no natural endpoint is permanent. The second mechanism is the slow replacement of anticipation with obligation. Every game in your library was already a moment of genuine interest. That interest was real. Something created it. A recommendation, a trailer, a mood, a genre, curiosity. The purchase was the expression of that interest, not a substitute for it. But interests have a shelf life. It's context dependent. The version of you that added a game to the library 3 years ago was operating in a different context, different life circumstances, taste, different relationship with the genre, different amount of bandwidth available for the kind of commitment that the game requires. And over time, as games accumulate faster than they're being played, the library fills with interest that has expired. Games that the curated version of you doesn't particularly want to play, but that the library is still treating as actual commitment because they were purchases, because someone said that they were good, because they've been on your priority list long enough that removing them would feel like admitting failure. This is how a library built entirely on genuine enthusiasm becomes a list of obligation, not through bad decision, through the natural expiration of the interest those decisions were based on, combined with the failure to acknowledge the expiration honestly. But you're probably thinking, but acknowledging it means admitting I wasted money on things I'm never going to play. That's sunk cost instinct doing exactly what sunk cost instincts do, keeping you paying a psychological tax on purchases that was already made and cannot be unmade by continued obligation. The money is gone. The question is whether the game still belongs to who you are right now. The obligation creep, the gradual replacement of genuine anticipation with acquired obligation across a library, producing collection that feels like a to-do list rather than a set of obligation. Not a result of a bad choice, but of interest expiring faster than the games are played. The third mechanism is the most psychological of the three. The backlog becomes a measure of something that was never supposed to measure. Not in your game completion, not in your purchased habits, but of your worth as a player, your commitment to the hobby, your seriousness, your follow through. The implicit, never quite examined belief that a player who finishes things as a better player, a more legitimate player, a more real one than a player who doesn't. This belief is almost never conscious. It doesn't announce itself. It operates in a background of every session, every purchase, every moment of deciding whether tonight is a gaming night or not. It's the voice that says you should be further along by now. It's the reason the completion percentage feels like a grade. It's why abandoning games, even a game you decided you don't enjoy, produces a feeling that is out of proportions to the actual stakes of the decision. When the backlog becomes a measure of self-worth, the signals from the previous sessions aren't just symptoms of a disorganized library. They're symptoms of misplaced standards. The dread when opening the library isn't about the games, it's about the evidence the library is holding. Evidence of everything you set out to do and haven't done yet. Evidence that the gap between who you intend to be as a player and who you actually been is still open and growing. That's not a backlog problem, that's an identity problem. And identify problems that don't respond to productivity frameworks. So where's the line? Not a specific number, not a specific ratio of owned played, not when the library hits a size that some external standards declares excessive. The line is here, the moment the library stops being a resource and starts becoming a record. A resource is available to you. You draw it when you need it. It has an option about how quickly you use it or in what order or whatever you finish everything you start. It exists to serve you access to something you love. A record is an account. It tracks what you've done and what you haven't. It holds evidence. It can be evaluated. It implies a standard of performance it expects you to meet. The backlog becomes a problem exactly when the transition from resource to record completes. When opening the library feels less like accessing options and more like confronting evidence. When the games you haven't played are telling you something about yourself rather than offering you something for tonight. That transition is reversible. Not easily, not immediately, not through a single purge or a new rule of a third day challenge, but reversible through the specific practical steps that actually address the mechanism rather than the symptom, which is exactly what comes up next. Everything up to this point has been diagnosis. This is the part where something changes. The first thing worth saying about practical steps is the same thing this channel says every single time practical steps comes up. The goal isn't a system. Systems are how the problems got worse in the first place. Another reorganization, another list, another tier list, another set of rules imposed on a relationship that doesn't need more structure. It needs a different orientation. What follows isn't a framework. It's a set of specific, actionable shifts, each one targeting a different part of the mechanism, each designed to move the relationship back towards the functional state rather than just reduce the number. Do them in order, not because the order is sacred, but because each one builds the condition that makes the next one possible. Step 1. Stop before you add anything. Not purchasing freeze, not a rule about how many games you are allowed to buy this month. Something more tangible than that. Before any acquisition, sales, bundles, recommendations, impulse, pause long enough to ask one question. Not would you enjoy this, not is this a good deal, specifically, do I feel genuine anticipation for this right now? Or am I responding for something else? Something else means the urgency of limited time sales, the social pressure of community recommendations, the identity maintenance of staying current with what's relevant, the relief of adding something to the library without the commitment of playing it. None of these are wrong in isolation, but if they're primarily driven by the acquisition, if the honest answer to the anticipation question is no, not really, the purchase is feeding the obligation creep rather than the library. It's adding to the record rather than the resource. You don't have to say no to everything. You have to say no honestly. And the pause is where the honestly lives. The acquisition pause, the deliberate gap between purchase impulse, purchase decision, used to separate genuine anticipation from the psychological functions that buying has been performing in its place. Step 2. Do an honest audit, not on your games, but on your relationship with them, not a reorganization. not a new tier system. An honest pass through the library asking a single question about each game. Does this still belong to who I actually am right now? Not who you were when you bought it, not who you intended to evaluate. Who you are today, with the taste and the time and the energy that the genre relationships you currently have. The games that answer yes are your actual library. The ones you want to play, that match your current appetite, that you should start tonight if the conditions were right. The games that answer no, honestly without the sunk cost rationalization, belong in one of the two places. Either a cold storage category where they sit without generating any psychological pressure, acknowledged as games for a future version of you that may or may not arrive, or gone entirely, removing them without guilt, because the version of you they were purchased for is no longer here. This audit feels uncomfortable. It's supposed to be. The discomfort is the sunk cost instinct residing the honest answer. You paid for those games. Acknowledging that you're not going to play them feels like admitting the money was wasted. But here's what actually is true. The money was spent at the moment of purchase. It doesn't come back whether you're playing the games or not. The only question is whether you keep paying a psychological tax on top of the financial one, carrying the weight of games that no longer belong to you. Letting them sit in the library generates obligation, feeding the record rather than the resources. The audit isn't about the money, it's about reclaiming the library as yours. Step 3. Rebuild the shortlist. After the audit, what remains is a library that's more honest than the one you started with. And inside the library, there are games you actually want to play. The ones that made it through the honest question. The ones that still belong. From those, build a short list. Not a priority list, but a ranked queue. A short list 3 to 5 games maximum. That represents your genuine current appetite. Different enough from each other to cover different moods and session types. Short enough to be real rather than aspirational. This list is the only part of the library you're actively thinking about. Everything else exists, it's available, but it's not in the conversation. The mental bandwidth is what being consumed by the entire library. The background processing of hundreds of options simultaneously gets consolidated into 3 to 5 actual choices. The scroll stops. The decisions exist before you sit down. The library becomes a resource you've already drawn from rather than a problem you're solving at the start of every session. You're probably thinking, but what if I finish everything on the short list and want something different? Then you build a new short list. The audit already did the work of making the remaining library honest. Choosing 3 to 5 games from an honest library takes minutes. It doesn't require rebuilding the whole system. Step 4. Redefine what success sessions look like. This targets the identity mechanism directly. The belief that playing well means finishing things, making progress, moving the completion number. The replacement metric is presence, not how far you got, whether you are generally there. 45 minutes session where it had your full attention and you were inside it, absorbed, not calculating whether it was the optional choice, is a successful session. Full stop. It doesn't matter where you finish a chapter or hit a milestone or made measurable progress towards completion. The session was for you. It gave you something. That's what it makes it successful. This sounds simple. It isn't, because the process metric is deeply ingrained, reinforced by achievement system, completion trackers, or websites like Backlog, Infinite Backlog, or Backloggery. And every platform that shows you a percentage and implies it should be moving. You're swimming against a current that the entire ecosystem of gaming culture is running, but the current is pulling you towards management. Presence is what pulls you back towards play. Every session evaluated by progress is a session that can only partially succeed, because the library is always larger than any individual session can address. Step 5. Protect the condition, not just the time. This one's the most practical one and the least obvious. Finding time to play isn't enough. The condition in which that time arrives matters as much as the time itself. Tired, fragmented, low bandwidth version of you sitting down with high demanding games on a Wednesday night isn't a gaming session. It's a setup for a session that confirms the worst version of the story. That gaming doesn't feel good anymore, that the backlog is impossible, that something fundamental has been lost. Protecting the condition means knowing what you need to show up to a session well. For some players, others, that's energy, which means protecting sleep and not scheduling demanding game at the end of exhausting day. For others, it's mental quiet, which means not picking up complex narrative games in the 20 minutes between two obligations. For others, it's physical comfort, the specific setup, the specific environment, the specific absence of competing demands. None of that is precious. None of it is more prepared than the hobby deserves. It's the recognition that the experience of playing is shaped by everything you bring to it, and that bringing the wrong condition to a good game conducts a bad experience of a good game, which is one of the most reliable ways the library accumulates negative association it doesn't deserve. Match the game to the moment. Match the moment to the condition. Protect both. Step 6. Let the record go. This is the last step and the most important one. And it isn't a task with a completion state. It's an ongoing practice. The record, the accumulated evidence of everything you own and haven't played, of every game you started and haven't finished, of every purchase that expresses an intention you haven't honored, that record doesn't have to be carried forward. It happened. The library is what it is. The gap between owned and played is what it is. None of that is changeable by continuing to hold it as an evidence of something. The only thing carrying it forward accomplishes is keeping the library in a record mode rather than resource mode. Letting it go, it doesn't mean pretending it isn't there. It means deciding actively, deliberately, more than once, because this decision needs to be remade, that the library, its job is to give you options for tonight, not to account for the past, not to evaluate your performance as a player, not to hold evidence of who you intend to be, just options for tonight, from which you choose one. That's the whole relationship, reduced to its actual function, stripped of everything the obligation creep and the reweighting of ownership of experience had laid on top of it. And that's what you're getting back. And the steps are how you get them. The backlog becomes a problem the moment it stops being a library and starts being a ledger. Not when it hits a certain size, not when you fall behind on releases, not when your completion percentage stops moving, when the relationship inverts, when the games exist to measure you rather than serve you. That's the line. And everything in this video has been about how to find your way back to the right side of it. The 6 steps aren't a system to maintain. They're a single reorientation, broken into pieces that make it actionable. Stop acquiring on autopilot. Audit honestly, shorten the list, measure by presence, protect the condition, and let the record go. Do that, not perfectly, not permanently, but genuinely. And the library starts feeling like what it was always supposed to feel like. Yours. Not a project, not a record, not an evidence of anything. Just a collection of games you love, available whenever you're ready, asking nothing of you except that you show up and play. That's still possible. That was always possible. If you made it this far and you're ready to actually start moving the needle in your library, the previous video covers every method I've personally used to tackle a backlog, including the one that I keep coming back to. Because knowing when the backlog becomes a problem is only half of it. Having a method that works for how you actually game is the other half. That video is the practical companion of everything this one diagnosed. Worth watching back to back. And as always, if you enjoy this kind of content, if you enjoy discussions about the backlog, about managing the backlog, about playing with intent and enjoying games, then you're in the right place. Subscribe to the channel for more content like this, as I've got a lot of videos that I want to cover. I've got a lot of topics to talk about, and I'm looking forward to share them with you. If you like the video, feel free to support it with a like and turn on the bell notification so that you'll be notified every time I post my next video. As always, my name is Vashal, and this has been a Tellplay video. God bless, stay safe, and happy gaming. Humble starts the hunter and the dreamer say,